At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Dès ma première rencontre avec M. Nehru, Delhi et à Chandigarh,
how from being a totally dusty plain, Chandigarh is now covered with greenery.
City must grow. It must be given a direction.
Hello and welcome to the story of Chandigarh, a podcast about how the modernist city of Chandigarh came into being and what its future might look like. This is Ishan Shafla, and with me is Dr. Vikramaditya Prakash. In today's episode, we'll talk about Corbusier's Masterplan for Chandigarh. We'll be discussing the layout of the streets, the uniqueness of certain sectors, and the peculiarities of the Masterplan. We will also talk about the significance of trees as well as the lake within the fabric of the city. So maybe we talk briefly today about the master plan before moving into a discussion about the capital complex.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's do that.
So first off, we wanted to ask what you think might be the reason the sectors are laid out the way they are, sort of like a zigzag, snaky pattern. Is there some logic behind it?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. Yeah, because you're right. Sector 1 is the capital complex, then it goes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 comes down, and 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Why did they do it in that format? You know, the sort of scuttlebug I've heard growing up is that because of this arrangement, if you add the two sectors that are, next to each other, vertically speaking, then they're always divisible by 13.
Right.
So that's what I heard growing up as a kid. Is that true?
Yeah. I think it's true to a large extent. I mean, when you go way further down south, maybe it doesn't happen in some places.
Yeah, in the original sectors. Yeah, that's right. And
so
there isn't a sector 13.
Right. So that's Corbusier's way of sneaking in 13 without having sector 13 in there.
Yeah, I don't know. That was the conversation at home and in the street about why they were organized like that. I once remember asking my father about that, and he said, no, there is no real logic. It's just a pattern, and this 13 business was just a coincidence that everybody noticed and everybody thought was funny and good. But it's not by design as far as I know, but it's an interesting thing that it has worked out like this. And I think also this was their attempt to sort of not make it feel very mathematical, like an Excel spreadsheet. So this was a way to sort of have some variation, subtle variation without too much disorder. It's like the same way that the east-west roads, all the margs, the paths go north-south and the margs go east-west, right?
I don't know if you heard, they have renamed, I think, Mani Majra as Sector 13 now.
Achha, that's a new thing.
Yeah, because they wanted it to feel like part of the city, because it is. They designated as 13.
Well, that's probably a good idea. Because I think originally, one half of the university sector was Sector 13.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
But then they decided to make that into one large sector so that the university campus would feel like one cohesive unit.
Mm-hmm.
So they just eliminated Sector 13. So the original 13 was not there, not because for any superstitious reason, but because they amalgamated it into Sector 14.
Which is larger than the usual sector.
That's right, because they needed more land to make the university, Punjab University. But so that's good. So Mani Majra has now been made into Sector 13. So I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I wonder how they feel, the residents of Mani Majra, because 13 is a sort of taboo, and like in hotels they don't have the 13th floor because the superstition of it being unlucky.
I know.
To follow up on that, I want to ask about the curve that's present on the east-west roads.
Yeah.
I've heard multiple, stories about the logic behind that, and recently I was listening to the Jane Drew interview, Jane Drew lecture at the AA in
Yeah,
the 80s. And she
yeah,
mentions that it's so that the sun's not in your eye when you're driving the whole time.
that's right. Yeah, that's what
But in,
I've also heard. Yeah.
in other versions, I've heard that there was an error in the laying out of the roads that compounded over time. So it was an error that sort of made it go not completely straight, and then they went on with it because they were like, "It's all right, let's
Yes,
continue."
that's right. I think that Yuli Chaudhary said that was an
Right.
error, right? Right. Yeah. Growing up, I also heard the same story that Jane Drew said in that interview, which is that the east-west margs were curved that way to try and keep the sun out of your eyes and to
Mhm.
have a little bit of a sense of, not going down a straight road so that you would know that you're on a marg and that, it's more, it's supposed to be more friendly in neighborhood oriented, whereas the paths, the north-south roads, are supposed to be for rapid movement down the length of the
Right.
city. That's what I heard. But I would believe Yuli Chaudhary just as much because maybe there was an error in laying out the roads. And Corbusier was all for this, about incorporating error into the design. He was all about it. My father tells a story that when they were laying down the foundations for the School of Art in Sector 10, and the
Mhm.
foundation, the pillars were supposed to be directly north, south, east, west, right? Because it's angled north, south, east, west. So
Right.
my father, since he was the local architect, he went to the site and he saw that they were like 2 degrees off, 2 or 3 degrees off, direct north, south. And he ran back, and Corbusier was there, and he said, "Monsieur, they have made a mistake. The orientation is off by 3 degrees." And Corbusier famously said, "We are architects, not astrologers. Don't worry about it."
So in a way,
So,
he was
yeah,
embracing imperfection in the
yeah.
plan.
And embracing imperfection was the rule in Chandigarh. That you think about all the concrete, the rough
Mhm.
concrete and the very crude finish.
Right.
The Japanese would never accept that, right? Or even the Americans and the Swiss. You look at Unité de Habitation or La Tourette or Carpenter Center in the United States, the concrete is perfect. But in Chandigarh, Corbusier loved all the imperfections of the concrete.
Wasn't he quoted as saying somewhere that in a pursuit as big as this, if you get 66% success, consider yourself lucky?
Yes,
Something along
yes.
those lines.
I totally buy it. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think I'd forgotten that. You're right. Yeah.
All right. One more question on the master plan is how important do you think this was that the sectors are laid down, kind of laid out top down? So the density increases as you go further down south, and the size of the houses also shrink
Yeah.
in the same direction. And you sort of also experience with the diminishing green space around your houses, there's a scarcity of resources as you move down.
Yes. So this is a recognized critique of the Chandigarh plan, that it is supposed to be hierarchical. Yes.
Mhm.
That the fancier, bigger sectors are in the north, and then as you go further south, its sectors become denser, and lots become smaller. And I think that is, of course, factually true, but one has to understand the context behind it, right? So when Chandigarh was set up, it was set up mostly as an administrative city, and the 16 hierarchies of houses, the 16 types of houses, with their accompanying how much land each would have, was in the brief that was prepared by Fletcher and approved by Verma and Thapar as what was required for the city. So, the type 1 house was the governor's house, and then type 2, I think, were the judges and houses, and type 3 were the legislators' houses, and so on. And, there was the hierarchy going down. And then, since the capital complex was placed right at the north, those big houses belonging to the legislatures or judges were at the north to be closest to the administrative heart of the city. Now, the denser sectors were made from the capital's point of view in the middle of the city. So the heart of the city was considered Sector 17, right? Madhya Marg and Janpath intersecting at Sector 17. That was considered to be the real living heart of the city, what you would consider downtown in America or Connaught Place in Delhi, like that was the real living heart of the city, not the capital complex. And capital complex was the administrative center of the city. So the real main sectors were around Sector 17. So that's why Sector 22 was the first to be developed. That was the representative sector from the point of view of the designers. Like that was what they considered to be the heart of the city. So that's why you have, Jane Drew working there, Maxwell Fry, all the architects designing in Sector 22, because that was considered to be really the representative sector of the city. And then, so the Sector 22 was supposed to be what most of the sectors would be like.
They started with what served as a template for the rest of the city.
That was the plan. But by the time we got to the second phase of Chandigarh further south, by then even higher densities were expected and required, which made sense because the city should have higher density. It's a good idea to have higher density, correct? So it evolved in that. But it is sort of the Babugiri of cities. This is an administrative city, and it's all about the administrative densities. That's how the north sectors got a special category as the place where the administrative leaders of the city lived, and with that, a certain upper class that were early to arrive in the city.
Yeah, you do get the impression that the proximity to power, to the capital, results in better facilities, fewer power cuts, those sort of things.
That's welcome to India. It's welcome to the world. It's true everywhere.
Yeah.
But, important thing to note is that Corbusier's plan actually was about 60 to 70% of the land that Albert Mayer's plan did. So he actually shrunk the plan and made it denser. So in spite of that, Chandigarh has this low density in the northern sectors. And of course, not to forget that if Corbusier had had his way, there would be no houses like this in Chandigarh. He would have wanted to build unité de habitation, like these big towers with kind of mass housing systems. He proposed those to Verma and Thapar, and they laughed him out of court, basically. He wanted something more like the unité de habitation, those big housing blocks that he designed all over Europe after the war, held up on solid concrete pilotis. He wanted to build the big housing situation, which kind of looked like the Secretariat, but housing with housing. So imagine a bunch of secretariats distributed all over the place in various forms. Perhaps in, and he has this implicit idea, you see actually the Secretariat is lined up with the Leisure Valley, right? That's why when you go to, I think it's called the Hibiscus Garden, where the memorial is, the Martyrs Memorial, the War Memorial or something, the new building has been made. Anyway.
Right, yeah.
So from there you can see the Secretariat, it is lined up with the green spaces. And so you could actually extend the Secretariat and it can travel down the Leisure Valley all the way down. You could have the snaking Secretariat go all the way down Leisure Valley, like the Algiers plan. It could continue on. So he left that as hanging in the air as a quiet possibility in Chandigarh, that if one wanted to, one could extend the Secretariat forever down the green belt of the Leisure Valley.
I mean, Perhaps there's multiple instances of that throughout the city of things left hanging, sort of incomplete, intentionally so, so that maybe because he couldn't foresee exactly what the future might demand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And when we come to the capital, we'll certainly talk about the capital as a incomplete work. But the city itself, definitely, you are right, had a strong sense of, to be completedness to it, right? And I think you see that in the master plan, most particularly in the original master plan, as the way it is nestled into the landscape. So with the capital complex in the north, with the area reserved around it, so that's like the sacred land, right? And it is sort of anchored into the Shivalik hills. And then the whole master plan is placed between the two intermittent rivers, the Raos, Kansali Rao and the Sakhetri Rao, right? One that comes out from the lake and one that comes beyond the engineering college and beyond PGI and the university.
Right.
So Kudali share, near Kudali share. So those two go, let's say, on the east and west side, the Shivaliks to the north, and then the city is laid out very carefully between those two rivulets, those two intermittent rivers, which means it has a to be continued sign to the south. The original plan was that you could just grow the city infinitely to the south. It was not designed to grow on the east-west. So, Panchkula came into being because the Chandigarh's boundaries were made narrow, and then Panchkula land went into Haryana, so they developed Panchkula on one side. Whereas that was never a logical addition to Chandigarh. That was the sort of the DNA of the plan, which also is verified by the slope, because that's the direction which the land slopes. So water flows down in that direction. And all the major roads, the paths, the fast-moving roads all go north-south. So that always the axis was that if the city was to grow, it should become a linear city with fantastic transportation north-south and secondary transportation east-west.
I mean, that sort of happened naturally, don't you think, with the development of Mohali? But yeah, you do feel a drastic difference when you move out from Chandigarh into Punjab, into Mohali.
Yeah, well, that's because, they sort of developed the city a little differently. But I'm saying plan-wise, the logical continuation of the city is north-south. So, the master plan is often described as if it's in the form of a human body. Which is which I've never really. I've sort of heard Corbusier sometimes talk about it that way, but I don't think it was a big concept. But nevertheless, it has the head, it has the heart. Head is the capital complex, the heart is Sector 17. Then it has the lungs, which is all the green belts, which is the Leisure Valley and the green belts that go through the sectors. And then the limbs, which are the educational units, the arms on one side being
the industry.
Industrial area, and on the other side being the engineering college, PGI, and the university. So that's a sort of a description over there. But one of the key things to know over here is that the Leisure Valley, of course, goes in a sense continuously through the city. Yeah. But the green belts in the city, within each sector, were also intended to be originally a continuous thing, that the green belts were intended to connect one sector to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. And the green belts were supposed to all have bicycle paths. And the bicycle paths were all intended to originally go under the Marg, under Madhya Marg, under the east-west roads, so that the bicycles could happily and easily travel up and down the green belts.
Uninterrupted.
uninterrupted. Now, these were never built except for one bicycle path. One underpass was built between sector 11 and sector 15. But they made it motorized. So, but they were all supposed to be bicycle paths connected that way, along the green belts. And the green belts, all the schools were placed in the green belts. So the thinking was that the schools would be independent, as freestanding objects. And the green belts would be continuous, continuous playing fields for everybody.
Right.
But then, every school put boundary walls around, got huge, these playing fields. This is ours, this is ours, this is ours, this is ours, this is ours. So all the green belts basically got chopped up. So if you look at the original plan, it's not just the leisure valley, but all the green belts of the cities from each sector were all supposed to also connect, making it a significantly, pedestrian oriented and continuous green space concept.
The layout of the sector becomes a microcosm of the master plan, in a sense.
In a sense, yes, that's right. That's right. Well, the layout of the sectors now is another story in itself, right? So in the Mayer plan, in the Mayer-Nowicki plan, every sector was divided into threes, three parts, A, B, C, right? But Corbusier's plan divided the sectors into 4 quadrants, with one road going through the middle and another road going north-south, dividing it into 4 sections. And of course, the V3s forming the edge of each sector, right? And there was debate about that, which is a better plan, because dividing the sector into 4 effectively made it possible to enter the sectors from any middle point of the road, right? And people felt it divided up the sector, whereas Mayer's plan gave it 3 sections, and you could only really enter it at certain points on the east-west, and sort of made it some units larger. So in the end, of course, Corbusier's plan won, except that they kept the memory of the Mayer plan in sector 7 and sector 8. Only sector 7 and sector 8 are divided into 3. See, sector 8 has only A, B, C. There is no D.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I thought it was like a homage to Mayer was how the markets were laid out in sector 8 and sector 34.
And sector 7
Was it?
also. But sector 8, yeah, basically. Sector 8 market has the Mayer plan market, or rather the Nowicki markets. Nowicki laid out the markets.
Which are non-linear.
Non-linear, which is in this sort of seesaw. They create a central space. And the sector 8 market is quite successful, right? Except for who knows why it is really successful. Because really the successful side is on the other side, where all the food stalls are and
That brings up an interesting point about how the sectors were originally proposed to be self-sufficient with their own, you can get everything within your own sector. You have your own schools, hospital, and markets where you can get everything. But over time, as we know, each sector developed its own specialization. So you have a computer market in sector 20, and 22 is known for something else. And so how do you think Corbusier would have responded to this appropriation?
I think concept was that each sector would be a more or less self-sufficient neighborhood, right? With the market being, 15-minute walking distance. There's no, from any place in the sector, you should be able to walk to the market within 15 minutes. That was the concept. And yes, you're right. Over time, the markets of each sector have developed specialization, because that's how market forces work, correct? So auto workers, so you want 4 or 5 shops to cater to every people. It develops identity. So that has sort of been a natural evolution. But one of the interesting thing is, nevertheless, each sector's market does always have a, general store and Dudwala, the basic necessities still are distributed everywhere. So it is serving to a certain extent both functions. But you're right, individual sectors, markets have acquired identity, which in a sense I think is good, because then sectors have their own identity also. But then there are, of course, the special neighborhoods like Sector 10, half of that is given over to, what was considered to be the cultural complex, anchored by the museum, School of Art, and the first location of the Museum of Knowledge in the City Museum, as part of the Leisure Valley. So those were sort of developed into special institutions.
And Sector 26, you see a similar thing with the schools.
Yeah, so 26 is a strange story. I don't know how that developed. I don't know how those schools ended up being located there. It's a good question. I think because they were near the river waterway, that was just considered sort of land at the edge and sort of at the edge lands. And they just placed these schools there because it was considered green zones. All the educational institutions, like I said, were supposed to be in the green belts, and the green belts were supposed to be open and continuous. And I think they located them that way over there. That's why, St. John's, you go, Secretariat, you go, they each one have so much land, right?
Yeah, it's massive.
I mean, it makes no sense that those schools should have so much land. But that, I think, was later on, like they were just supposed to be school buildings. You look at the St. John's building, it's like a mini unité, right? It's like a mini tower.
Yeah.
It's not a distributed building. Original building, the first building. That was the idea, that these would be these tall buildings with all the build functions concentrated on them. And then there would be open fields, like Maidans open, anybody could play over there, the community could come play, anybody could come play. But then because it's kids, then you gotta keep them secure and contained during lunchtime. All the schools got boundary walls. So, which was, of course, a realistic concept. But I'm just saying, it was not supposed to be that way.
Yeah, also in terms of the numbering, it's an odd one.
I know. Suddenly 26 over there. Right.
And do you think the golf course was always part of the program?
No, I don't think so. Golf course was not part of the original program. Neither was Chandigarh Club in Sector 1. These were all supposed to be big parks, open parks. But the babus of Chandigarh, the upper class, they said, we need a club. So they got made.
That's
care
funny
of
to think.
Body and spirit. Yes.
That's interesting to think that there's two sort of separate institutes, or let's say complexes on either side of the capital that weren't originally planned, and Corbusier was completely against the Rock Garden on the east and the Chandigarh Club to the west.
Well, yeah, Chandigarh Club came up by plan, but semi-plan in Corbusier's lifetime, and he hated it. A rock garden he didn't know about, and that sort of came up clandestinely. And golf club, I don't know when that came up, whether that came up in Corbusier's lifetime or that came up after MS Randhawa was chief commissioner. I'm not sure. That would be worth investigating. Shivdat Sharma designed the original golf club building. So yeah, it's interesting that these things came up. And Chandi Mandir came up to the northeast on the hills, which also Corbusier vociferously opposed.
You mean the army cantonment?
Army cantonment, yes. So airport is on V1. That was placed there as per routes. And the train station is also on a V1, which goes to Kalka. Right. So those were placed as per plan on these big roads connecting Chandigarh to other cities. So those were placed properly with the idea that, people coming to those places could take fast moving systems From the train station, take Madhya Marg into the city. From the airport, take the interstate road from Delhi into the city. So those were placed properly. But all these leisure institutions came up later. And then Chandi Mandir was made independently. And Chandi Mandir was the army. Airport was Air Force.
Yeah, I've seen that letter which Corbusier, I think, wrote to Nehru complaining about Chandi Mandir coming out and, trying to figure out how to put a stop to that.
That's right. That's right. Nehruji wrote to, I think, Gopi Chand Bhargav, the minister, or Pratap Singh Karan, the chief minister, saying, do something. This was Corbusier's modus operandi. He would write directly to Nehru and say, fix this what these plebeians are doing.
Oh, I just heard something really funny in the Jane Drew talk where she says that Corbusier wrote to Nehru in the middle of the construction of the High Court saying, I need to be paid twice as much because it's, process of developing has taken me twice as long as I initially planned.
Yeah, that's right. Corbusier was always complaining about never being paid enough. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't paid much, for his stature and for the sort of size of the project. And I think the amount of work he put into it, he was hardly paid. But he got to do the biggest project of his life. And Genre worked in Chandigarh as a salaried employee,
Yeah. Even so, you do feel that the budget allocated to Corbusier's part of the city was much higher than the housing and the rest of the master plan.
Oh, for sure.
So
but those were buildings of state, no? These were they were trying to rival Lachand's New Delhi. Still, compared to what Delhi cost, Chandigarh cost a lot less. Because this was just concrete.
Yeah.
Unadorned concrete. No fancy stonework. They were made in a very basic way.
I heard a quote from Maxwell Fry where he says that Chandigarh, regardless of all the criticism it gets, it's perhaps the cheapest capital cost per inhabitant.
Yes, that's right. That's right. In terms of construction. Now, one other thing to remember, of course, is they got the land for free, basically, more or less for free. All the agricultural land was appropriated. So, not appropriated, but eminent domain. So, land was never a cost. And now, the biggest value in a house is land.
Yeah.
So that factor has to be kept in mind. But of course, this was all agricultural land. So it was taken over. So anyway, that's good. In terms of the master plan, the only other thing perhaps we should note is, that there's, of course, the hierarchy of road systems. One other thing to note about the master plan is that, every sector is internal looking. No housing ever opens onto the big roads on the outside. Right. So every sector is designed in such a way that every house opens onto a small distribution road, which is to say that it is relatively protected from the fast-moving traffic. So it is quite amazing that you can be living in Sector 8 or Sector 18 or, right in the heart of the city, and you can still walk out of your house and not feel like a car might run you. Right?
Yeah.
But anywhere else, if you go in the world, the closer you are to the heart of the city, the closer you are, and to the big roads, they become very difficult, So, and that, of course, enables that there is no sort of disruption for the big fast-moving traffic either. Because you go down the V3s and the V2s, the Margs and the Putts, the big north, south, and east-west roads, there is no housing opening onto it. Of course, the Margs have, the big showrooms opening onto them. But they have their own distributory roads, and they have their own sort of system to accommodate traffic into them. So still that system works relatively well. And when these roads were laid out, everybody said, oh my God, so much circulation and just Belgadi moving on it and bicycles. And there was a lot of criticism of Corbusier. Now, of course, the situation is reverse. All the roads are packed and everybody is like, why did you make them bigger and wider? Other thing too is that in the first phase of Chandigarh, all the villages that were incorporated, their housing was destroyed, was bulldozed, except for their temples and gurdwaras. So all the mandir and gurdwara locations in the northern sectors are determined by where there were temples and gurdwaras already present. So all the mandirs and gurdwaras are old. Plans of sectors were carefully set up to incorporate these institutions into the fabric. So the mandir behind our house in Sector 8 has been there in Kalibangan village since before Chandigarh. So that's an important thing to note. Now, in the second phase, of course, the villages, organized themselves. And they refused to, be bulldozed, vacate.
Yeah.
So those were kept, but they were put in lardoras. So the villages in the second part, what are they called? I forgot the names now. Budel, etc. They are oriented north, south, east, west, so they are at a diagonal to the rest of the grid of the city.
Yeah.
And second, they have a completely different, organization. So they have this special incorporated village status in the southern sector, which makes for an interesting sort of digestion of those neighborhoods into the city. So it's an interesting story. The other significant, I think one of the most significant things about Chandigarh was its tree planting strategy. Trees were planted, I don't know, maybe even in the millions, but hundreds of thousands all over the city. There were no trees in the Chandigarh land. So there are a few ancient groves of mango trees, like the one grove in at the lake, in the Capitol complex. There's one in, I think, Leisure Valley. There are few that exist. There are few old trees because this was agricultural land. And then the way agricultural land is made is by cutting out all the trees. And that was done like thousands of years ago. It's not like done recently. All of Punjab, all of Uttar Pradesh used to be a dense forest, 3,000 years ago. But then deforestation was necessary to create agricultural land. So when the site was acquired, there were practically no trees in Chandigarh. And Corbusier himself first developed an extensive tree plantation plan. But then the real detailed tree plantation plan was developed and implemented by MS Randhawa, who was an IAS officer, right, and became the first chief commissioner of Chandigarh. He's the man who did all the trees and all the tree plantation.
And did they collaborate, sit at the same table and decide which tree goes where?
I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but I think Corbusier must have given the general directives, and I think MS Randhawa detailed it out. MS Randhawa was a serious horticulturist by interest. And he wanted different flower color bearing trees for each sector. So I've never really known which color belongs to which sector, but apparently the trees of each different sector are supposed to flower with different color flowers, particularly along the V4s. That's the concept, that they flower with different color. And along the V3s, the trees were designed to create shade canopies.
Like a tunnel.
Like tunnels. And I think these are quite successful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Chandigarh is now a heavily treed city. But that's all new plantation.
That's very hard to imagine Chandigarh without trees, but of course it was like that at some point.
Yes, that's how the land was. It was a dusty plain.
I think it's such a core part of how people in Chandigarh identify with the city through its landscape and through its trees.
That's
and
right.
greenery.
Trees, greenery, food stalls, and rock garden, and maybe the lake. And some people have heard of the Capitol complex, but not many know about it. So,
but I think the greenery in particular, because it's such a scarce commodity in the usual Indian city.
That's right.
And here you have it in abundance.
Here you have it in abundance, in a planned manner, with the sidewalks of edges of every major street, with land dedicated to trees. And thank God for that, because otherwise they would widen the roads and just like take it over, and it would be just a disaster.
From the master plan, maybe a natural transition would be to talk about the siting of the buildings within the Capitol complex.
Yes, so let's talk about the general siting of the Capitol complex. So the first thing is that originally the Capitol complex was where the lake is. In Albert Mayer's plan, the Capitol complex is on an island in the middle of the lake.
Oh.
And Mayer-Nowicki designed this amazing, beautiful looking Capitol complex on this island with a bridge, basically where all the jungle is now, if you look to the north of the lake. That is where the Capitol complex was supposed to be original. That's where Albert Mayer and Mayer-Nowicki designed it. So imagine the lake with water all around and with these buildings in the middle shimmering and reflecting and so on. That's where it was going to be. And Mayer-Nowicki designed this huge big podium kind of floating in the air with this dome, kind of modernist dome, not a traditional dome, kind of emerging out of it. A beautiful building, actually, Mayer-Nowicki's concept. So if Mayer-Nowicki had not died and Mayer's plan had been implemented, the Capitol complex would have been in the middle of the lake. So imagine that, first of all. And in a sense, that idea was implemented when, in a very, very different way, when Geoffrey Bawa designed the Sri Lankan capital. And that sits in the middle of the lake. And to a certain extent, I suppose, Brasilia is kind of like that. Yeah. But no, it's not a lake, but yeah, whatever. So I just wanted to say that. Then when Corbusier took over the plan, he shifted it away from the lake and he placed it where it is now. And he picked what was basically the highest ground. The lake was formed by damming two arms of the Secretariat. They already formed a kind of a U shape and then came together to make the one river, one intermittent Rao that goes down the lake between, Panchkula and Chandigarh. So he moved the Capitol complex away from that. His general concept for putting the master plan together was to stay away, to leave the waterways free. Was to not disturb them. So that's why he moved away from where Mayer and Nowicki had placed the Capitol complex.
You think that's something to do with how eventually water became a significant part of each of the buildings in the Capitol? The pools,
yes,
and the reflecting
that's
pools.
Right. I think he put in the reflecting pools later, in part as a memory of the original Mayer-Nowicki plan. I think that's a reasonable inference. Yes, I think so. P.L. Verma, as the chief engineer of the project, from day one wanted to build a dam and a lake. Because building dams was something P.L. Verma as an engineer. Because they were building Bhakra Dam and so on, and dams they knew how to build, how to hold back water. And the original plan was to build a dam on the Ghaggar, not on the Secretariat, the small Raos where the lake is now.
Sure.
Original plan was to build a dam on the Ghaggar, and make a big lake.
Hmm.
And the idea was that that would also supply the water for the city, the drinking water. But that proved to be way too expensive.
Bakranangal Dam still supplies water
Yeah,
to
so
the city.
then water came to the city from Bakranangal. They said, we need water. So where do we get it from? They said, okay, we'll get it from Bafa.
Mhm.
So that was the plan B. So once the rationale for building the big dam on Ghaggar went away, P.L. Verma still wanted a lake. So he said, okay, we're going to make a small lake where the Sukhna Lake is today. And he dammed the Secretariat and built the lake.
And it was sort of conceived as a gift to the city, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of a presentation of the city, that it would be a gift of serenity to the city. Like, so for instance, Corbusier made the gate of the lake with a chain across it, right? I don't know if that chain is still there on one side to signify that no cars are allowed on the promenade of the lake. That this is to be a place of quiet. And originally in the design, no motorboats were also were to be allowed on the lake. It was to be completely quiet. And the lights were supposed to be dim so that, it'd be signal.
And of course, he designed the lamps.
The lamps,
the concrete
yes.
lamps for the lake.
The concrete lamps. And he put a concrete slab over there with inscriptions and motifs on it. And I think he designed the bandstand.
Yeah.
And the pump tower, the water pump tower into the lake. I think they're all by Corbusier. I don't think those are by Jean Rey.
The pump tower I've heard attributed to John Ray, but not so sure.
Okay, maybe that's right. Maybe it is Jean Rey. But it was a collaborative effort, and they loved it. They loved it. Yeah, the lake was very successful from day one. It was loved and very inhabited from the very beginning.
And that's also one of the places from where he, I think, didn't he draw the Capitol buildings from initially?
Yes, he sketched the Capitol from there.
Yeah.
He
Like it
loved
was really important to him how they looked from that vantage point.
Yes. And they looked magnificent, he noted. Now, of course, you can't see the Capitol buildings because
of the
so
tree
much
cover.
tree cover has taken over. But there was a time, and I have video footage of the Capitol buildings from the lake. Though the lake is a story in and of itself, and maybe we can take that up another time. It's the long history of the lake.
Thanks for listening to The Story of Chandigarh. This is your host and producer, Ishan Chofla. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can email us at storyofchandigarh@gmail.com. We'll continue our conversation in the next episode. Until then, this is The Story of Chandigarh.